Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrera. This is a podcast about art, poetry, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 23. Today's featured guest is Michelle Peñaloza. She is the author of Former Possessions of the Spanish Empire, which won the 2018 Hilary Gravendyk National Poetry Prize and will be published in August 2019 by Inlandia Institute. She is also the author of two chapbooks, Landscape/Heartbreak by Two Sylvias 2015 and Last Night I Dreamt of Volcanoes, Organic Weapons Arts in 2015. Her work can be found in places like Prairie Schooner, Upstreet, the Normal School, and Third Coast. She is the recipient of fellowships from the University of Oregon, Kundiman and Hugo House, as well as the 2019 Scotti Merrill Emerging Writer Award for Poetry from the Key West Literary Seminar. Michelle has also received scholarships from Lemon Tree House, Caldera, Vermont Studio Center, VONA, Voices, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, among others. The proud daughter of Filipino immigrants, Michelle was born in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan, and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. She now lives, farms, and writes in rural Northern California. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Michelle Peñaloza. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
I am honored you wanted to be on your Artsy Girl podcast. But before we talk about your newly released book, I would like to get to know you a little more. Can you tell us where you were born and where you grew up?
Yeah, so I was born in the suburbs of Detroit, and that's where my parents actually, they both immigrated separately from the Philippines. That's where they met. So that's where I was born. And then when I was about to start third grade, when we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and so that's where I mostly grew up.
Wow. Yeah. So did you travel a lot when you were young?
Not a ton. I would say we would take road trips, mostly always go back to Detroit, the suburbs of Detroit, to see family, because my mom is one of 12 and my dad was one of 11. So, and so all the holidays, it was just us in Nashville. And so my mom especially, but me too, we always wanted to go back for anytime there's a wedding or, all the family events. So we were always going back to Michigan, but then, we would take road trips to Florida, visiting family mostly. So, yeah. So is there a Filipino community in Nashville? There was when I was growing up. It was very small, It's funny. So I went during undergrad, I went to Vanderbilt, which is in Nashville. So I was in my hometown while I was in college, but it was a, very different experience because I lived in the dorms and stuff. And I remember I was part of the Asian American Student Association. I was the social chair. And I remember all these Asian American kids from the East Coast and the West Coast and bigger cities and stuff. They'd always be like, oh God, there's just not very many of us here. There's not enough of us. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? There's 50 of us in this room right now. It's amazing. It's sort of relative what community looks like. So, but yeah, there definitely was a Filipino American community. There was my parents, especially when we first moved there, I remember when we would go to the grocery store, they would kind of befriend any Asian person that they saw too.
I know. Well, I can relate because when I was growing up here in my adulthood, early adult, and coming from the Philippines to here, my ears would perk up. If I hear somebody speak, Tagalog or something, or, someone looks Filipino, because where I was up north at that time, there in Connecticut, there was hardly any Filipino community there. And so now in Florida, it's the same thing. So I can relate to that. That's why I ask, was there a Filipino community in Nashville, and there's Filipinos everywhere, I'm sure. Yes.
It's true.
It's not like we're in California or in New York City, where there's plenty. So that's why I like to ask guests where they're from and where they grew up, because it really kind of sheds the light on what you're working on and what you've worked on. In that vein, who were your earlier influences, poetic influences?
Well, the very first poetry I came to that was like poetry that I went to on my own, that wasn't something that was in school, was Neruda. Neruda. And that's probably where I get my love of litany and catalog, just like lists and lists of things.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that was probably the very first. And then, from there, like I always loved reading. I was always getting in trouble for having my light on and like having a flashlight under the covers, like go to bed. But for as far as poetry goes, Liang Li's Rose was a really big influence and eye-opener. It's kind of the first whole collection I ever read all the way through. And I kept reading his poems and then flipping to his picture and reading his poems and flipping to his picture. And it was kind of one of the first times I was like,
why did you flip to his picture?
Well, he is good looking. That's also, that was not the main reason.
That's why I had to ask you.
But that's funny. I never really thought about it that way. But it was also because, all the books like that I had, or, I didn't know that we could, Asian Americans, it wasn't like it is now. I'm 30, I'm going to be 36. And now it's like, it's amazing. It's wonderful. But there's so many poets of color, especially Asian American poets, to find that are, that have work out that you can go to a bookstore and there's like a shelf full. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it wasn't like that growing up in Middle Tennessee. It was not like that at all. And so that was a really big book for me because it was, I could identify with the face behind those poems.
Liang Li is amazing. I love his work too. Definitely.
Yeah. And Marilyn Chin and Garrett Hongo and AI, the poet who did all those dramatic monologues. I don't really write dramatic monologues, but there's just something about the way she can occupy a voice and create a world and create empathy and love for a really despicable character that grabbed me immediately as a younger reader and poet.
Great. Yeah. Can you tell us a little more about your new collection of poetry entitled Former Possessions of the Spanish Empire? Where did you get the idea of this collection?
Well, these poems I've been writing, I mean, the oldest poems in the book are probably 10 years old up to maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So it's been, in the works for a while. And Former Possessions of the Spanish Empire, the title poem came later. And it kind of came about, obviously the title references the sort of shared history and effects of Spanish colonialism, cultural things like surnames, like our last names, for example.
Yes.
The legacy of colonialism, but it also speaks to the way that those large structural histories affect and complicate our intimate interpersonal negotiation. So like kind of exploring, how does a colonized body, how do colonized people, on a macro and micro level, like how does that interact with the way that, mothers and daughters speak to one another and relate, and fathers and daughters, and how does a colonized person's relationship to her own body work in that way? And so it actually might be helpful if I read the title poem.
Yes,
and then maybe
please.
More about collections about. I always go back to the poems. That's sort of where I talk more, or I can talk easier about what it's about with an actual poem instead of talking about it.
Sure.
Okay. So I'll read Former Possessions of the Spanish Empire. People name us with the separation of their teeth, the long Z of our naming. It used to be we were named for our proximity. Kato tabing dagat, the parentage of the sea. The forest's lineage, Kato ginubatan. Or we were named for our parents, Anak ni Lina, bunso ni Boyet. The song of our names led to the discovery of garlic growing from our palms, the scapes forming a second green hand. But it was in the name of good King Philip that our songs changed to names, and the naming of names became law. A governor general made a name for himself with the Catalogo de Apellidos, a dissemination of empire, a naming of parts to trace and tax everyone. Whole provinces renamed with efficient alphabetical phenomena. Padilla, Pacheco, Palma, Paz, Perez, Portillo, Puente, Peñaloza. Still, there were names we kept to ourselves, a shorthand between us. Windows lined with votives, jars of holy water, the papaya's lush coral and beaded seeds shining fish roe. Can legacy exist in shorthand? Papal, papa, papel, papaya, paalam, permission, please. What are the root words for what we simply know? How do children born of empire, once removed, possess the history of their naming?
Wow, that's powerful.
Thanks.
And you talk about colonialism, and in fact, it's really about post-colonialism. Well, how do the effects of colonialism still happens to us? It's true, though. I mean, and then when you talk about, ancestral past and the past trauma is still within us, that gets passed on, now indirectly, of course, but it still lingers. It's still there. And how prominent is it with our surnames, right? Do you have another one for us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, let's see. We'll do this one next. When will we ache less? From a desert in Nevada, a man launches flowers into space. Just now I thought, why, when you are closer, am I more lonely? The you could be anyone. Maybe distance is what I equate with love. You are away, and I am alone with the bullfrogs and crickets and raccoons that pull up the new sod like carpet, their child fingers searching for grubs in moonlight. Elsewhere, white men chant, "You will not replace us." Why is being born white in America not enough? Above me, the geese form haphazard, V, floating over the house. Loose victories each twilight, paraded from one sewage pond to the other across town. They don't leave the valley for winter. This world and what comes from our garden is too much to process. Abundance is a burden of responsibility. This rash of tomatoes reappears and reappears with so little effort, with so little to do with me. What is it like to be everywhere? To be seen and heard and known and believed with so little effort, with so little to do with you? I collect facts. Facts are marbles in my mouth. How to hold each one, how to keep, how to speak, how to scream with so much to contain. My mouth grows bigger and bigger. Butcher birds hold their prey and dismember it. The cacti, their knife and larder. 26 young Nigerian women were fished from the Mediterranean and dried as headlines and disappeared again. Bullets shot from an AR-15 move through bodies like boats, exits wounds the size of oranges. Hyenas eat ghosts that wander the streets. They eat the bones the butcher's sons and sons and sons feed them from their hands. Someone found a grasshopper stuck among Van Gogh's olive trees, trapped for 128 years. Dragonflies hover over the kiddie pool we soak in to beat the heat. Thrips burnish 1,000 holes into a row of bright green leaves. The scuttle of skinks along the fence line sings feline, a Rolodex of ours. A raccoon just made carcass, splayed across the road. The cattle wires come alive with feathered gargoyles. Spread wings follow each speeding car. Every hour more wings, sky full, coast on warm carry-on wind. I could measure the days this way. Name after name after name. The raccoon, a meat balloon fur crumple, disappearing, disappearing.
Wow. I love your leaps and associations. It is wonderful.
Thanks. Thank you.
I believe in your bio, you did state you did have other poems that poetry collections.
Yeah, I have two chapbooks. One, they were both released in the same year. Was that 2015 or 2014? One of those years. They happened at the same time. But the first one is Landscape Heartbreak, which was published by Sylvias Press.
Okay.
And that one is so people in Seattle took me. It was kind of like more project based book, and people in Seattle took me to places where they'd had their hearts broken, and I mapped all of that using what was the name of that app? It was like Runkeeper or something like that. And yeah, I mapped it all. There's like a map in the chapbook that has all the walks that people took me on, and I wrote poems based on those experiences.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, it was a cool project. I met a lot of really cool people through it, and yeah, I my own heart was doing some healing, and it was I didn't feel alone in it, because there's so many different ways a person's heart can break. People define that in all sorts of ways, and so people took me on really cool walks, and it was a really cool way to get to know Seattle as a city as well. And
wow.
Then, it was pretty cool. And then the other chapbook is called Last Night I Dreamt of Volcanoes, and that one was out from was published through Organic Weapon Arts Press. And that one is it was kind of like the precursor to this collection, in that there's a lot of poems about trauma and grief, and I don't think I was quite so focused on nationhood and post-colonialism and those reverberations, but I can see the beginnings of that there. Mm-hmm.
So this one here, it's your first full-length collection then.
Yeah.
That's great. I had a chapbook through Dancing Girl Press. And then, that was years ago. But I never put a full-length collection until just this year. Also, it's by Astrolabes and Constellations through Agave Press, and they are also based in Seattle, I believe. Yeah.
Oh,
Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Congrats to you too. Is it so ready?
Yep, it's up on my website, ChristinaCarrere.com/books. I mean, if anybody's interested, of course, it's there. And I will post your website on the show notes also. So, a link where they can go ahead and find your book and purchase it.
Awesome. Everyone buy both our books.
Yay!
Yay!
What, aside from your newly released book, what are your current projects and your future goals?
Well, so I feel sort of sheepish saying this, but it's, just an honest answer. Right now, what I've been really working on is trying to get this book out in the world and have people care about it. And
right?
It takes a lot of work. People don't talk about the hustle enough. It's real,
It's real. And this is why I did the podcast. I said, you know what? It is a hustle. I am telling you, you have to
It's sort of funny, right? Because it's not like people are really clamoring to buy poetry collections.
Right.
And yet it's a lot of, so honestly, a lot of my time when I'm not working, my job is, just I've been trying to coordinate different readings in different cities. And I'm having I don't live in Seattle anymore. I live in rural Northern California, but Seattle, I still sort of consider my literary home. And so I'm having a bunch of launch events in Seattle in August when the book comes out. And that's just been a lot of work, like a million emails back and forth with several different people, and like it's great. I'm really excited for it. Like the first launch event is going to be a literoki event, which I totally copied from Kundiman.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But so it'll be like, some of my
karaoke literature, right?
Yeah. So, people like some of my closest, poet friends in Seattle will help me like launch the book by sharing their own work and singing and being roped into singing karaoke.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
great. And then,
I haven't had a book launch either. I mean, it was because in my publication, I couldn't pinpoint a date when it was going to be actually published because, of certain circumstances and whatever. And so I was like, I don't even know. I don't even know where to go and how to do it. So I'm doing the hustle too.
Thank you. Well, we could talk after this podcast and like talk about, because I've gotten a lot of help from people, like I feel like when you ask community, they like step up. It's amazing. And so I would be happy to talk about that with you.
Thank you.
Really, I'm not doing it by myself at all. It's like,
right. And that's why I love this podcast, is because not only is it feature the works that the writers and artists are doing or having published. However, it's also to get behind the scenes a little bit, like, what is it? What's happening with you? How's your process? Your, the challenges you have, and also, pick your brains about who influenced you and how did you get into writing. I'm so glad that you reached out to me, and that's what I'm here for. That's why I post out submissions. Anybody out there listening and you have some work you'd like to be featured, please drop me an email at yourartsygirl@gmail.com. Got the plug in there a little bit. I like to ask this question about process. Do you have any set routines on how, you create poetry or anything like that?
No, I'm so bad. I don't have there's some people who are like, I get up at 6 a.m. and I write every day. I think that's more of a prose writer thing. But no, I wouldn't say I have like a set process. I feel like I have, like one of the things I say when I am teaching creative writing classes is I say like that writers you don't just write, you're reading. Like, I feel like if I'm not reading, then I have nothing to be thinking about there's nothing feeding the writing. Like, I mean, of course there's lived experience and like observing things, but like, I think just being in conversation with other works helps me. I think too, I'm trying to think of, I feel like I just do things to get unstuck, or like I keep a notebook of just lines, or like I write down things that like interesting bits of language that occur to me, or like, as I'm eavesdropping on people, or like, like a or like a memory that comes up, I write stuff down. And then when I sit down to compose things, I kind of like look through my bag that has like napkins or like a notebook or like whatever that I've written stuff down, and I just kind of like look at it. And
I wrote a poem about that. Pieces of me and miscellany in the abyss of my purse.
Oh, nice. Okay, so our process is similar then.
I can so totally relate. No, I am not one of those people that write every day, every morning. But my process is I find a trope, a theme, or whatever have you. I have something, an idea. Like in my full length, I looked over all the poems that I've written throughout the years, and the ones that I've recently written, and just kind of like say, okay, what is this all about? Mm-hmm. And so I saw a lot of themes of travel, nautical imagery. So that's where I got my collection by Astrolabes and Constellations. And then my next one is, I think it's going to be something about curating, something like curator of lost things or something like that.
So, I like that.
Yeah. So I'm working on that idea. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your work and your process and everything like that. It's great to talk to the poet about that stuff. So where can people go and look for you and your work?
So you can go to my website, which is michellepeñaloza.com. No tilde because the internet. So MICHELLEPENALOZA.com. And there's, links to some of my work that you can find online. And then my book comes out August 9th this year, 2019, through Inlandia Books. And that's coming to hopefully a bookstore near you. And if you would like me to, if you're interested in having me come read or teach a class or Skype in, just message me on my website because have book, will travel.
Very good. That's what I'm here for. Get that out there and let folks know who you are, what your work is, and where they can get it.
Thanks so much for having me, Christina.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Podcast. It's so great. I love podcasts. It's awesome that you're doing it.
Do you listen to other podcasts as well?
Oh, yeah. I do farm work. And so I often have my headphones in. I'm often listening to all kinds of podcasts. So,
and what do you have a particular app? Where do you get your podcasts?
I just use it through my phone, my iPhone. So I just do the Apple podcast.
Well, your Artsy Girl podcast is on.
Oh, you don't say. Okay.
I'm very syndicated.
You.
We are very syndicated. And, I say we because it's not just me. It's the artists that I feature. So we are syndicated on Apple, Spotify, all the major outlets. I try to shoot it out into the universe there. So, and if you Google your Artsy Girl podcast, you'll see all the outlets that come up. But the easiest way, if you don't have an app, is just go onto Google or something and type in the address, yourartsygirlpodcast.com, and on /episodes, because that's where all the featured artists are going to be listed. And you just click on there and you'll see that it has the media player built in there. So you don't even have to worry about apps and all that. No.
Easy, folks. Just look it up and click the button.
Just click the button and play. And now we are binge worthy.
Yeah.
You're going to be 22nd or 23rd. Yeah, we're in the 20s.
Oh, nice.
And we're still growing. And I don't know when I'm going to just start the second season. I'm thinking the seasons now.
You're in the podcast game, if you can say, on the next season.
I know. Well, it's almost like trying to think up, your whole poetry collection, what's going to be happening? How are we going to piece it together?
Totally.
Michelle, it's been great talking to you and learning more about you and your work. I wish you the very best of luck with your book and all your endeavors, and please keep in touch.
I will, and congratulations on your collection too.
Thank you.
Maybe we can read together. Let's talk.
Let's talk. Yes. Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye.